how to make Ireland the best place in the world to grow up. And when I was chatting this morning, I spoke a bit about pessimism and things like that, and optimism. And to be honest, this was a really important session for us. We'd been chatting to Niall and Chris, the Ombudsman for Children in Ireland, Niall Muldoon, and also the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, Chris Quinn. We talked a lot about doing a session that focused on children and the future. And that was really important for us at MacGill, because we don't want to be just analysing and sometimes be, like I was saying, it's sometimes seen negative. We want to talk about the future and throw out some amazing ideas for us to do something that is possible for Ireland, ultimately. We're delighted with this amazing panel of speakers, and it's fantastic to have you all here. But we were really delighted when the chair of Gaisce, Áine, Kerr, agreed to host this panel. It was fantastic for her to do it, and it's perfect for us that we get her to chair this panel to understand the future and hopefully create a better Ireland for all of us. Thank you so much. Please welcome Áine, Kerr.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming back here and filling this room for this really important conversation. And I really hope over the next 75 minutes with this incredible panel of speakers that we're going to be able to take you on a little bit of a journey, that you'll leave here with a real understanding when you go to the coffee break in 75 minutes about the challenges, the opportunities in front of our children and our young people, and that next generation that we so desperately care about. But ultimately then, what are the solutions? What are the creative things that we can do for the young people in our lives to make sure this next generation are really set up for success? And so hopefully when you leave here in 75 minutes, I want all of you to think in the audience about how you, as an individual, can be the one good adult as well. Because sometimes when you listen to panel conversations like this, you can go, well, that's somebody else's problem, and that falls to this department, and that's that convention, and that'll be true, and you're going to hear all of that play out. But as you're listening to each of these speakers, I want you to think about how you can be the one good adult, leaving a really important conversation, going back out into the world and impacting the lives and children and young people as a citizen of this world and in your communities around you. So with that, and we will leave time for questions at the end, so as you're listening, be thinking about powerful questions you would like to ask this panel. And to give them their introduction, to my nearest right, Dr. Niall Muldoon, Ombudsman for Children, and a lot of you will recognise his beautiful Donegal accent that appears on radio and TV very frequently, and he is back on home ground here in Donegal today. To my immediate left, we have Professor Roseanne Kenny, Founding Principal Investigator at the Irish Longitudinal Study on Ageing, TILDA, and Chair of Medical Gerontology at Trinity College Dublin. And if you have not read her book, highly, highly recommended, and we'll give it lots of shout outs over the next 75 minutes, Roseanne. Beside Roseanne, we have Chris Quinn, Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, and I'm feeling very guilty because I think Chris has already been out running around the hills of Donegal today and is alert and ready to go. And here to my far right we have Patricia Forde, Ireland's Laureate for Nanog, former director of the Galway International Arts Festival and co-founder of Baboró International Arts Festival. And as you're going to hear from Patricia, she has been on a lengthy tour as part of her remit that did come to Glenties, where she was touring schools along the Atlantic Way. So we realise we all have very, very happy memories about Donegal. Mine, unfortunately, is very much to do with Monaghan being unceremoniously dumped out of the quarter-final. So this is kind of like reliving my trauma here, having to see all of these Donegal fans and flags, but off we go. So we're going to start, because at times you may despair when you're going to hear some of the data points today. There's lots of calls for optimism. Many of you may already know Ireland is the youngest population in Europe. And when it comes to literacy and education, there's so many positives. But you're probably also going to hear a story that is heartbreaking when it comes to the data around poverty, homelessness, access to hospital surgeries, and we see that in our headlines again, when it comes to your rights as a child and maybe a child with disability and complex needs. But we're going to try and look at all of it in the round. But I want to start first on an optimistic point, and that is to think about moonshots. And moonshots are something we should all sometimes have the privilege to think about, which is your magic wand and to think about the grand ambition and to start there and work our way back through wicked problems and messiness. And maybe, Patricia, you might start with your grand ambition for the children and young people of Ireland.
Thanks, Áine. And it's lovely to be here, back in Glenties. My grand ambition is very simple. I would like every child in Ireland to be a reader. And when I say reader, I don't mean literate, and I don't mean reading as a hobby. I want children who are reading for pleasure and who form a habit of being readers so that they grow up with something that is beside them at all times that they can read. So that would be my magic wand moment. Make all of them love reading, be competent, fluent readers.
And within that, you make an important distinction between reading for pleasure versus reading literacy. So
we're brilliant
brilliant
on literacy. Ireland, in the last big survey, we were second in the world for children aged 10 in terms of literacy. Singapore are the only ones who are better than us. So there's a big difference between that and reading for pleasure. You can be as literate as you like and never read a book. We know that children who read for pleasure at the age of 10 will do better in school, will do better in life. And now science is telling us that children who read for pleasure at the age of 10 will be happier. So this is not a hobby anymore. This is urgent. Childhood is short, and that need is really urgent. We have to catch them now, while they're young. Okay. And I would think as well, Áine, early years intervention, we need them from the very beginning of their lives, being used to books.
And we'll come back to the how, because libraries play such a critical piece in this in our schools. But Niall, moonshot.
Yeah, it's great. And first of all, I just want to say how great it is to be here. A long, long time ago, back in 1991, I got the pleasure of spending 4 months in the Bank of Ireland in Glenties working with the wonderful Paddy Gallagher. Anyone who's local would know how brilliant he was. And on that year was the year that Joe Muldoon had the genius idea of bringing Brian Friel here for the week. And I got to see the Abbey Theatre do 3 single acts up in St. Columba's. So since then, it's been a bucket list to be involved in the MacGill School. So I'm really delighted, and I want to say thanks to Vince and to Pádraig for making it happen. So for me, moonshot, I'm in my 11th year now as Ombudsman for Children, and what I'd like to do is find ourselves thinking 10 years from now, looking back, say from 10 years from now, somebody is going to come to us and say, in Ireland, what did you do in 2025, 2026 that made you the best in the world for children? Why are you the ones we have to come to? So all my career, even before I became Ombudsman, if we had a thing, we wanted to improve something with children, we went to Scandinavia, Sweden or Norway. They were the ones who did early years when we were laughing at them. You know what? You're putting children into crashes all the time. Why would you do that? You're educating them before they go to school. Why are you doing that? You're giving parental leave to men. Why would you do that? So really, from my point of view, I think we need to move in that direction, that we become the world leaders in children's rights and protecting children from the very, very start, so that there's no sense that any child, or as importantly, their parents, are left behind and left to look after the child on their own. For me, it's really about ensuring that we're going to talk about the incorporation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But making that happen now or in the next little while, probably I would like to really push it forward that we commit to it from the EU presidency. Bridget was wondering what the tagline might be. That might be a really strong thing to say. We're going to commit to children's rights by incorporating the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. That would be my moonshot. So in 10 years we look back at and say that's when it started to happen.
Yeah, and then Ireland can be this lighthouse example to the rest of the world. For you, Roseanne.
So my area of interest and research is ageing. Why am I here? Because my moonshot is to make Ireland the best place in the world to grow old. And we're working very hard on that. And of course, the data we're collecting, data is the new oil, has a retrospective lens, because the childhood that one experiences very much dictates your life course and how you will age, and whether or not you will be happy and have resilience to buffer things that occur during your lifetime, as an adult, but also into old age. And I would like to see with that as we get older, we continue to have control over our own choices and don't have to worry about being ill, because we will all get sick at some stage, but know that we have a system ready for purpose to look after us, and then we can make a choice about what sort of supports we need when and if that should ever happen. Older people should never have to worry about control and where they will age. They should all be able to age in place happily. So that's my wish.
Okay, love it. Chris, your moonshot.
Yeah, thank you. And just to echo Niall's words, it's an absolute pleasure and an honour to be here today. I've been visiting Glenties for 25 years and I have a house just 5 minutes walk from here that my parents bought. So usually I'm running about the town in a GA top and a pair of shorts and flip-flops, so it was strange today putting the suit on. So look, thank you to the organisers for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here. My moonshot is very simple in many ways, and we'll come back to talk about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child very soon, I hope. I get excited when I talk about it. It's the most internationally ratified human rights treaty in the world. And all but 2 nations in the UN have signed up to it. So my moonshot is to ratify, full and direct incorporation of the UNCRC and the domestic law. And to put that into context, not so long ago, I've been in this job almost 2 years. About a year ago, I met a young girl called Aurelia. Aurelia is 12 years old. She has cerebral palsy. She's confined to a wheelchair. Aurelia missed the first 4 months of her secondary school education because the school was not equipped to meet her needs. And at a conference that she spoke at, and I had the pleasure of speaking at too, Aurelia asked that we make the law stronger to protect her needs. And that day I gave Aurelia my word as Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People to do what I can do to make that law stronger. So similar to what Niall is saying, I want full and direct incorporation of the UNCRC into domestic law in Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you to each of you. Well said. So that's the grand ambition. That's the ideal outcome. So let's go back to current day realities. And maybe, Niall, to start with you, looking at today through the lens of a child or a young person who's maybe experiencing poverty, homelessness, denial of access to education, hospital waiting lists. The list goes on and on when it comes to inclusion and their well-being. What does it feel like to be a young person in Ireland today?
Well, I think we try to take the temperature every year from children and young people, and we do a survey of young people, probably 1,000 children a year. We try and chat to them about what's going on for them. And again, we keep reminding ourselves 75 to 80% of them are quite happy in life. Most things are going okay. They might gripe about one thing, maybe a leaving cert or something like that, but most of them are in good shape. And that's good to hear. But they all will recognise they have difficulties with mental health and anxiety. I think that's an increased awareness of that within themselves. But in the broader scale, when we looked at it last year, children across the board from 12 to 17 year age, the concerns were education, homelessness, housing for themselves and homelessness in general, disability, so their friends who cannot get support who have disability, and then mental health, and the cost of living. So
the things that preoccupy us as adults is what is now preoccupying
correct.
A lot of our young people.
It's trickling down, and that concept, the cost of living, we hear it today, and we heard from Danny McCoy that there's €80,000 sitting in everybody's bank account. I've missed it in my one, but that idea that in average, but again, it shows you, to contrast that, 20% of our children are at risk of consistent poverty. So that shows you that 80,000, their 80,000 for each of those households is in somebody else's bank account. So the haves and the have-nots are much further apart than they used to be 20 years ago. The statistic I have often quoted is that in 1980, where the average wages was X, the average CEO's wage was 6X. 2 years ago, the average wages was X, and the CEO's average wage was 26X. So they're sailing away from us. The haves are sailing away from the have-nots, and children are the ones who suffer there all the time. So when the economic squeeze comes on, it's not the haves who start to feel it as much. It's immediately the child is already poor. We cut the social welfare, or maybe we don't cut it, we don't raise it, and it's their families that notice it, or the child with a disability, or the child with another vulnerability, mental health, who has found it difficult to get access. The homelessness situation, we have 4,800 children in homelessness at a time when we talk about a budget surplus in the last 3 years of 28 billion euros. That's only 2,200 families that need to be found a home. And that priority has never been given to children or families, and that's where we need to start.
And that stat bears repeating, just so everyone heard it. 5,000 children in homelessness today, and I think the stat on children in consistent poverty is now 100,000, up something like 48,000 in just a year. It's staggering.
Yeah, it's huge. And again, I looked at my notes yesterday. I went to meet the Minister for Housing yesterday, and I looked at my notes. 2016, I met a guy called Bob Jordan, who was a special advisor to Simon Coveney at the time around housing. And at that stage, he was talking about very soon implementing a housing unit that will have a director who will sort out all the housing issues. Mm-hmm. We now know we're still looking for the same person. That 450,000 euros was the previous payment for that. But that's 9 years later. So when you talk about not implementing things, it's the children who constantly feel the impact of poor decision-making or no decision-making.
And I'll come back to how that meeting with the Housing Minister went yesterday. But Chris, that's Niall giving an impression of to be a child, a young person, south of the border. What's it like north of the border, particularly when we look at scenes in recent weeks coming out of the likes of Ballymena, when we think about information disorder was probably at the root of that, and we see cricket in the news yesterday. There's all these little pockets of stories that, well, looking on the periphery would make me worried. How do you feel, and how would you take the pulse?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, Northern Ireland tops the poll in lots of negative ways. In terms of homelessness, I saw a Freedom of Information request by the Simon community recently that told us that 18,500 children in the north are homeless, are registered as homeless. I think we have about 5,000 children in temporary accommodation. And it baffles me as to why we have silence. You know, in the south there's a huge outcry about homelessness and the housing situation. In the north, those figures are mind-boggling. Poverty sitting at about 25%, so 1 in 4 children are living in poverty. So 1 in 4 children are maybe going to school hungry, whose mummy or daddy is choosing to heat the house or put dinner on the table for themselves. And the reality is lots of those children are talking about the cost of living crisis, and they are worried. Little children shouldn't have to worry about those things. Mental health is a huge thing, I think, across the world. But in Northern Ireland, 1 in 10, 11 to 19-year-olds in a recent survey told us that they would engage in self-harming activity. 1 in 8 young people have suicidal ideation, and our child and adolescent mental health waiting lists are through the roof. In terms of health generally, paediatric waiting lists have increased by 172.6% since 2016. And that was through a report published by the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. So those things are stark. We know that things are difficult in terms of our budget. Things are fragile in terms of our government. Things can move very, very slowly. But as Trish said at the start, children can't wait. Children don't have time. And there are such a plethora of issues. You know, I could talk about youth justice. I could talk more about the budget. But I think, as Niall says, children, in my opinion, are the big losers. They feel the pinch the most. And I think the geopolitical situation that we reflected upon earlier is also affecting our children. They're seeing trauma in the palms of their hand, on the screens, on our televisions. Arguably, this is a time where we have the most wars. I don't know if I'd need to fact check that, but we almost have never-ending wars across the globe, and these things are all affecting our children. And then the legacy of the past in the north. You know, you've seen last August racially motivated violence. You see sectarian violence. You've seen it again in Ballymena. And when people sometimes put their head above the parapet, then you get targeted, you know. So, yeah, there's a lot to contend with, but we need to give children hope.
Yeah.
And we can.
And we will come to the hope, don't worry everyone, and the solutions and how we fix this. But Roseanne, as you listen to all of those startling data points from Chris and Niall, and that is the lived reality of many children and young people today, but putting on your futuristic hat, and if sometimes past performance is the best predictor of future performance, what are you seeing happening in the UK and US in terms of those ageing trends, that if we don't get what's up ahead of us right, it's going to be the same lived reality for this generation coming through?
First of all, from what I've heard now, and this is universally accepted, what we're doing is we're engendering deeply seeding adverse childhood experiences. It's very hard for a family to buffer good humour, goodwill, and to buffer children from feeling depression, feeling mental health issues in an environment that's so transient and uncertain. That uncertainty that a parent or parents are feeling will transfer to children. And it sows seeds at a very early age. We're aging from the day we're born. But children who experience circumstances that we've just outlined actually have an accelerated aging process. This has been shown in studies of children followed through now in Dunedin up until their mid-50s. So the children who were experiencing depression in a home, alcohol issues in a home, drug issues in a home, homelessness, uncertainty, etc. Those children, their aging, their biological aging, we can measure it very clearly from looking at cells, certain ways of looking at cells. That biological aging is much, much faster and continues at a faster pace from mid-20s onwards. So it's what we're doing is we're creating a society, a future society or a subsection of society which will not get a chance at any stage unless we get it right now.
And when you look at the US trends, the great divider is education.
So there's been a fantastic book recently by the Nobel laureate and health economist Angus Deaton, who we actually had speaking in Trinity the summer before last. And he has identified the fact that in the US now, whether or not you have a BA determines your level of hope, crudely, which actually is a strong predictor of when you will die, and particularly a predictor of midlife deaths. He calls the book Deaths of Despair. And looking more deeply at the phenotyping of the cohort who don't have a BA, they're much more likely to be obese, have alcohol issues, generally bad health behaviours, and in lower socioeconomic groupings. Now, this is a new phenomenon. It started in the 2000s, mostly in the southwest of the US, but now the contagion has actually taken over the whole country. And what we're seeing is that the job structures have changed so much in that period of time that you could at one stage have gone into a job, not have had a BA, but progressed through that job easily into a leadership role. So you had hope within the infrastructure that you spend most of your time working. That's now gone because we're subcontracting right, left and centre. In my own world in the hospital, I see it with systems, domestic systems or portering systems in the hospital. You were always, as I trained, part of the fabric of the hospital, no matter what work you did within a hospital. You were part of a team. Now they come and go. Some of our security people, our lifeguard, our safe bouncers at night, and they happen to appear in the hospital the next day, and we never see them again because they go to another hospital. So there's no security if you don't have the ability to come out of that level of educational insecurity.
Patricia, building on all of those points, and you come back to education is the great liberator, is the great equaliser. We'd started to talk about libraries earlier. Can you talk a little bit about what has happened there in terms of that key infrastructure, how it's been funded, particularly since 2018 and the School Library Fund, because they are the cathedrals of the mind, to quote Caitlin Moran?
Well, up until 2018, when I was teaching, every school got a grant to buy books. It was ring-fenced. It was only for that, to buy books for children. In 2018, that disappeared, and it never came back. So a couple of years ago, the government gave 20 million, a one-hit thing to all the schools. There was no guidance. The schools had to apply for it. Nobody was too sure how to do that either. So it was very difficult. Now, the thing about school libraries as opposed to public libraries are great and they could do with more resourcing, but they're there and they're open. The problem is, if you're in a family where your adult won't bring you to the public library, the place that we know we can meet children is in school. So they're in school from when they're 5 until, leaving cert, I suppose, a lot of them. But that is where we need to have school libraries. They need access to books. And if that money is ring-fenced and every school knows they're going to get it. I mean, we have hilarious things happening. Like, schools are getting grants to build a library. I've been in them. They have a gorgeous library with empty shelves. But they have bean bags and they have lovely things on the walls and they have no books. So we have to address that and we have to get that back, because already a whole generation of children have missed out. And like I was saying at the beginning, childhood is short. You don't get a chance to undo that. And if I could add to what we were saying earlier about, children I go around to a lot of schools and children are stressed. Even from the age of 5 or 6, they're now inclined to be a bit anxious, a bit stressed. If you think of, I'm sure many of you have done this, an adult with a child at night telling them a bedtime story, cuddled up together, we know now that feeling of safety and bonding goes with them through their lives. And they talk about these kind of memory paths where people can go back to that feeling. And what the feeling says to the child is, I am loved, but also I am important. So a big person has taken time to give me this time.
And you mentioned the word safety there, and I think when we all think about what makes us feel safe, it's home. It's not necessarily a house, but it's where you feel at home, and with home is consistency and predictability. And I guess, Niall, maybe to go back to that point, you mentioning meeting with the Minister for Housing yesterday, and I suspect you're not going to tell us what you got to say and what was discussed amidst the summer estimates, but if we could go back 5 years and design a housing strategy that had those children, those families at its absolute core. And of course, government and governance is about priorities and ruthless prioritisation and where it maybe would have fitted in a list of priorities. Would we have 5,000 children homeless today? Was there another way? And if there is, what is it still?
Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll go further. I'll go back to 2010, 11, 12. We had a system. It's not very often you look back and say we had the system right. We had a system, local authority buildings, social housing. People had them. They stayed on the waiting list were a bit longer than they should have been. But family homelessness was not even an issue until 2012 when the economic austerity kicked in properly and we moved away from providing it ourselves to providing it through private rental and through the private system. That was a system that needed to be brought back on track again. From 2016 onwards, again, I can list Simon Coveney and Rebuilding Ireland made a commitment that we would have 47,000 social housing by 2021 and that all the planning legislation that needed to be done to streamline everything would be done by 2020. So even if we'd hit our targets that we had set, we would be in a better place by 5 years ago. 2021, so 4 years ago, we as a nation committed to what's called the Lisbon Declaration, which commits to ending homelessness across Europe by 2030. So the whole of the EU is committed to that. And at that stage, we asked the government to say, okay, well, that's a great idea, and we're delighted for it. Will you start with children and families, please, first? Get them out of there, prevent them falling in, and get them out. No word. Nothing happened. They did whatever they had to do. And the only time there's been a reduction was when COVID forced an eviction ban. That's the only time it came down. when we met with the Minister yesterday, we moved forward, so let's have a strategic plan to bring children and families out. So at the moment, we've got 2,200 families, that's all it is, 2,200. And even in the bad days now, we're producing 30,000, 35,000 homes. Can we not, over the next 2 years, commit to getting these 2,000 out?
And what was the response? If it's 2,500, which is obviously way too many,
yeah,
but feels like a tangible, doable, achievable number.
The commitment was they're definitely going to start looking at it now. Which is a step forward, unfortunately. That's actually a step forward for us. I said, listen, if you're not going to do it, tell me now. If you're trying to do it, because I think what they've been trying to do is just do it across the board. And I'm saying here you have an opportunity, because, again, if you want to put money on it, it costs $350 million a year alone to keep those families in Dublin only. That's about 70% of the homeless, 350. So if you can get half of them out in 1 year, you have $150 million to play with to go the other direction. And it's not intractable. It is a thing that can be done. And again, if you move them out, the rest of the homeless have whole different issues. As we know, they're the mental health issues, addiction issues, singles and couples. It's a different type of answer or reply to make them out. So again, for us, I think it's a no-brainer that we move in that direction. I'm not sure what's going to happen from here, but we are certainly continuously letting them down over the last 9 years.
But you think government positively disposed to what you were trying to say?
That's what I heard. That's what I heard.
But we'll have to wait for the budget to see what more comes. Chris, the convention, UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, has been mentioned a few times. I think it's 30 years old at this point. And I think for the first time we have yourselves, north and south of the border, outside of Brexit, working together on how to enshrine it. I think there's only 2 countries that haven't signed up to it, one being the US, which means that when we're looking at these huge cutbacks in the US, children are not protected right now in the United States when it comes to these huge hundreds of millions of cutbacks. Why, more than ever, would you argue governments, north and south, need to ensure it is actually enshrined, future-proofed, protected in this moment where there's a lot of geopolitical uncertainty?
Yeah, no, I suppose just for a bit of fun, I would be interested to know if people in the audience have heard of the convention.
Give us a hands up.
If you've heard of the UN Convention, that's pretty good. Lots of people haven't, and I think that's part of the battle that we need to inform young people, children, and parents that this treaty exists. And in my view, incorporation is the single most important thing that we can do. We talked about giving children hope, and I thought it was very it was powerful today that today's conference started with a quote from Patrick MacGill in 1919, and it got me thinking about the journey towards the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I would argue that started in 1919 also, after the First World War. And the League of Nations was set up at that time. Soon after that, you had the Geneva Declaration, which is just over 100 years old. It was written in 1924. And then we had another terrible World War. In 1945, the UN was established. And in 1948, we had the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. So basically, the world set up and said, never again. Never again will children suffer like they've suffered. People started being very concerned about rights, and you had various activists during that time. And along that time period, in 1959, the UN Declaration was of the Rights of the Child was written, and then in 1989, we had the UNCRC. So this treaty is powerful. When I talk to children about this, I explain that treaty is a promise. It's a promise that our government makes to children. And it relates back to what Patricia was saying there about, let me bring you back to that feeling of getting a book read to you, sitting on your mummy or daddy's lap or your grandparents' lap, feeling safe and feeling loved and feeling secure. That's the very grounding of the UN Convention. It's there to protect children. It's there to ensure that their needs are met, and that can be around their safety, it can be around their development, it can be in relation to their health care, their education. And I just think it's such a powerful, powerful treaty. And if we did incorporate it, it could make massive
And is it possible, given that the two commission offices here, North and South, are working together on executing on that? Like, what's possible? Like, are there quick wins, North and South, that can be done that are already enshrined in terms of children's rights? Are there certain principles, like we talked about budget just now, so where kids are impacted by cutbacks, they should be the first to see them reinstalled, reinstituted, which we haven't seen with the libraries, as discussed by Patricia earlier. So where are there some maybe common principles, North and South, that you can use this convention to help push on to realise the bigger, grander ambition we talked about at the start?
Yeah, well, I suppose when Niall and I were both set in the context there, with the jurisdictions that we both work in, a lot of the issues are identical. You know, you've got very, very similar issues. Scotland recently incorporated the convention. Other countries, Norway done it a long time ago. Sweden in 2020 incorporated. And you've seen how it makes a difference in terms of the services that children receive, how budgets are spent. Our last session was on budget. And we didn't really talk about budgets through the lens of a child. I would argue, and I'm sure Niall would agree, that we need to carry out child's rights impact assessments in the decisions that government make, and part of that should be around child budgeting. But I do think this can be a moment in time, and a part of this moment in time is the cultural shift, and we saw that in other jurisdictions that have ratified. That if we can get our decision makers, our politicians, our policy makers talking about children's rights and thinking about children's rights when they're setting policy, well, that's a win. Ultimately, I will work during my term towards full and direct incorporation, but I think this could be a real historic moment, and I think it's, like I said earlier, 100 years on from the first declaration. And this could be another moment in time that our children and our grandchildren look back at and say, well, there was a moment in time. And especially given that I would argue that rights are under threat. You know, the geopolitical context, children's rights are under threat, human rights are under threat, and we need to secure what we have. We need to really pin it down, you know.
Niall, I might let you do a quick, I assume, +1 on everything Chris just said about the UN rights.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for quick wins, the government tomorrow wanted to change the multi-annual budgets, child-specific budgets. We have a Department of Health with a budget of, €24 billion. If I ask them how much they spend on children, they can't tell me. They can tell me exactly what they spent on every brick in the children's hospital, but not what they spend on children. If I ask them mental health, they tell me, we've increased the mental health budget by nearly 20% in the last 5 years to $1.3 billion, which is still about half of what most other countries do in relation to their overall health budget. But within that $1.3 billion, they can't tell me what they spend on children. So
it's very hard to measure impact, return on investment. Like, if we live in an era where, be led by the data, what gets measured gets done, you're operating in a vacuum with a lot of ambiguity.
And this is at the same time that if a comptroller and auditor general comes into my office, they'll ask me how I spent €50 on a taxi somewhere, you know, but they can't tell me what they spent the mental health budget on children. That's a starting point. Ring-fenced money for children. You're supposed to, I mean, again, 75% of all mental health issues start in childhood. So you'd think 75% of the budget or even 50% of the budget should be sent on that. It's not. And the reason it is because it allows the other part of the system to use it as a slush fund if necessary. If we don't say, well, it's definitely going there, then you can use it somewhere else. That happens in lots of other budgets. Education, again, there's going to be a lot of talk in economics about capital funding. 2 years ago, we had to fight with the government to get 300 school places between June and September for children with special needs. They can't build projects because they only get they get a budget for 1 year. So you can't commit to a building project. So again, if you want to commit to capital, let's commit to building what the schools are necessary properly to provide for the children of the future. Those sort of things are really quick wins. But within the incorporation, if we incorporate that into law, it'd be impossible for them not to do that. And that's the piece I need to get to, is where we've got a situation where there's a civil servant in the Department of Agriculture who doesn't even know why he's doing a child rights impact, but he's doing it. Like the same reason we are protecting our snails through environmental impacts. We don't ask about children. You know, and you can hear this discussion already. We're going to have to cut back the tariffs. We're worried about this. They're not saying we're going to have to cut back, but we will keep our €20 billion budget for children. We won't change that. And you've heard, if you take away one small thing for a child, 5 years later, that's impacting them still. You know, our last economic crisis was a nightmare for children because we cut everything across the board, and we left children with special needs in trouble. We left children with traveller children in trouble. We left children who needed extra medical help in trouble. We need to be thinking that way.
I'll bring Roseanne and Patricia in on that. That long tail, now you've been listening to a lot, there's a lot there in the convention, there's a lot on budget, but that long tail effect, but also just how to prioritise. Like you mentioned early intervention earlier.
Yeah, I'm listening to this, and I feel like a slight outsider, and I thought, no, nobody's talked about intergenerational transfers yet. Grandparenting has a huge amount to offer here, and I think it's underestimated. We know, there's copious data to show the value of a grandparent in a child's life. That's the first thing. And then I think in the context of housing and planning for housing, we must take that into consideration. These small, two-bedroomed apartments, where does that leave the broader family structure? So it doesn't seem to be taken into the equation. Furthermore, we have to consider social media in this discussion on children's mental health. The graphs clearly show that from 2012, when Facebook, etc., was really ramped up, that's when mental health issues also escalated. There's a clear linear association. And if you go into a restaurant now, for example, and look at a table with 4 older persons and a table with 4 kids, the kids will be on their phones virtually throughout the meal with no social engagement, no interaction, compared to their older peers who will be engaging, will be chatting, unless it's a family and they're having a, But it's very different, and this has kind of slipped in on us, and yet it's very causal for a lot of the issues that we've discussed. So don't underestimate the value of grandparenting, the toxicity, frankly, of social media, and the value that grandparents can bring to an alternative lens to a child's life. You don't have to be on your phone all of the time. You can talk, you can engage, you can discuss. And then in that context, we've shown that one of the most important factors for healthy, longer lifespan is social engagement. The quality of your friendships, not necessarily family relationships, they're very valuable, but friendships also. And our generations, I'm considering myself as an older generation, we nurtured friends, and most of us continue to do so. Even the fact that you're here today is nurturing engagement and friendship. That's kind of been lost, and the loss seems to me to be growing. So we really need to think of social engagement. Creativity is the other thing we've noted from the data. Biologically, people who are engaged in creativity as they get older, their inflammatory responses are much slower than people who don't engage in creativity. Again, very clear linear associations. So creativity is something we can introduce early into children's life. And again, it'll offer a buffer for all of these mental health issues. I see the mental health consequences of what's happening in society now to children being the biggest problem going forward for our society.
And it's a reminder, everything that you just said there, and Patricia come in, but that we're talking about budgets and spends and how to implement convention, and all of these things can cost money, but sometimes there's the make the right thing easy. Like, that's behavioural. Yeah. That's about time well spent. Yes. And just sense of human connection, serendipity, having that connection, and it blooms from there. Patricia, you want to come in on the long tail effect, I think, that Niall was talking about.
Yeah, I was just talking there as well about creativity, because a few things occurred to me. I think our children start off as creatives. Meet any small child, they're already very creative. Somehow along the way, we lose that. And Ken Robinson, who used to advise the British government on education, said once, he said there was a child in school who was drawing a picture, and the teacher said, "What are you drawing?" And the child said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "Well, nobody knows what God looks like." And the child said, "They will in a minute."
Love it.
But I think, there's a bit of a shortage of happiness and joy amongst our children. And we as adults are responsible for that. I'm sorry, but we are. And particularly with little kids, you know, despite everything you hear about them being on their phones all the time and screens, and they are, I get all that. But I meet them all the time. They haven't changed a bit. They are like I was when I was in school. I see myself there all the time. They are fun, and they're playing games, and they're making stuff up. The trouble is, as it goes on, the social media thing takes over. And as well as everything else, it's not just about them being happy. Being Irish, I think, is really important. Somehow or other, the social media thing has blanded them out. You know, we are the land of storytellers and writers. There's a whole lot of things we did wrong as a country. We did that really well. We have great writers. And I think we won't have any more writers if we don't have readers. And our children need to know they walk in the steps of those artists, and they too can be as creative as that. And I really want to see that happening, that they have an identity. It's the same way when we were talking about access to books. Access to books in the Irish language is really important for our children. Anything, I think, that separates them out from the herd is good.
When we talked during the week, you used a beautiful quote, and I won't even try to quote it, but it was about how we find our identity in books.
Yeah. And I was saying that, you know, in books, two things happen. We see others and walk in their skin for a while. But also, hopefully, we see ourselves. And children, when they read, are looking for themselves. The child on the halting site, the child in direct provision, the child who's homeless, they're also looking for themselves. And there's a lovely American children's author called Richard Peck who said once, if a child doesn't find themselves in a book, they'll go looking for themselves in all the wrong places.
Yeah.
And I think that is so true.
And all the wrong places are unfortunately where we see increasingly communities with misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, designed to spew confusion and disorder, but attract people in because you think this is your tribe.
And Áine, I also think, you know, we have let children down, there's no doubt. Generation after generation, we have let our children down. By making them readers, I'm going to keep banging on about that, by making them readers, we give them an independence, that they don't rely as much on us. They're able to find information. They're able to judge information. Reading is an inoculation against ignorance. Being able to read and find stuff out for yourself is so important, and it starts at a very young age. It also inoculates them against boredom and loneliness.
And it inoculates them because in the States they've done a lot of research that shows that age 11, 12 is when you want to try and inoculate kids against false news, fake news, misinformation, disinformation.
And that idea of one version of every story.
Yeah, but you have to teach them critical thinking, the who, what, where, when, how, why.
But there's the thing, I wonder about this as well. Is some of it because we don't openly debate things anymore? I worry about that. I think there are things you're not allowed to say. And if children don't hear honest debate, if we can't debate things, if we can't listen to one another, I can listen to somebody whose every word I despise, but I can still listen to them. I can listen and I can refute what they're saying. But if we go into our own little caves of silence, where, well, can't say that, I'm not going to say that, our children can't model anything on that. And I think a lot of with kids, it is modelling behaviour. They're watching us and they're modelling their own behaviour on that.
And it's probably a natural segue to the question of voting rights, because you mentioned there the ability to debate and maybe have very stubborn viewpoints, but you can hold them with a degree of flexibility and be open to changing your mind, and hence why public debate in a way that is critical thinking but is fair and open and transparent. And there is this question, it comes up around this time of year, we're heading into a presidential election, of should the young people that we are talking about on this stage also be empowered to vote at a younger age? And we just saw in the UK today, the Labour government seems to be making good on its promise to give voting rights to young people from 16, and they're going to make this happen by the next general election in the UK as of this morning. So maybe everyone jump in, but Niall, maybe to you first. Would you like to see voting rights given to a 16-year-old?
I think it's a great idea to start moving in that direction, because again, what it does is it connects you with the society. Because one of the automatic answers from a child is, well, we've no power. This gives power It gives you a voting bloc, which is what every politician is worried about. You know, if you can get 50 to 60,000 children to vote in one direction, then you've got a real bit of power. And I think it does involve engagement. And like every other cohort in the country, they won't all vote. They won't all take it up. But it starts the process. In Scotland, they started this. They did it deliberately, specifically for the independence referendum, and then they moved it to local authority only, I think. And I'm not sure if they're going to move to broader. For me, I would love to see it in time for the presidential now, just to get people the taste of it, to get the starting, to get the conversation going. But I'm not quite sure if that's in the process or in the thought pattern for the government. But for me, again, it's that engagement. And what it says, and this is UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, it says your voice matters. Now, the downside, people would argue, is does this start a slide down? You're now an adult, therefore we'll change your rights. And that's something we can counter separately. But I think as a general principle, I think it's a great idea. Whether we do it all the way for general election or start with one smaller elections, local elections, presidential, we'll see. But I think children would love it. Okay,
great. Chris, this is presumably something you welcome.
Yeah, could I just go back a couple of steps just to reflect on some of what Patricia said there, and I will come back to the votes. Because when Patricia talks, I'm hearing the language of rights. It's not there explicitly, but she talked about, if my memory serves me correctly, critical thinking. Play was where you started. So play is a right within that convention. So I believe that if that convention was fully incorporated, the child's rights to play would be better protected. And that could ripple out within communities and in schools and other places. You talked about the purpose. I was hearing, my translation was the purpose of education. So the UN Convention, Article 29, tells us that the purpose of education is about nurturing that child's talents and abilities. It's about developing those critical minds, those critical thinkers. Article 13 is about freedom of expression, so you talked about having conversations that may not be comfortable, or maybe with people who disagree with you. But the Convention protects all of those things. And Article 12, I'll bring it back round. Article 12 is the right to have a say, which of course we believe in strongly, and it's fundamental to the work of both of our offices, North and South. So in terms of votes at 16, Article 12 fits in perfectly there, and it's something that we have worked very hard for in the North. Young people themselves have lobbied for a long time for the voting age to be lowered. And the Labour government, it's good to see that they're living up to their manifesto commitment. So I think it could be exciting. You know, it could really change the landscape. But one of the things that young people have said about voting rights is that it should go hand in hand with education. And in education, a school curriculum, learning for life and work is the module in the North. But they want more time in there to talk about citizenship and develop their political awareness to go hand in hand with lowering the voting age.
Okay, great. I'm going to come to audience questions in a few minutes, but before I do, Roseanne, I wanted to ask about your research piece, because what you do is incredibly comprehensive, but from the ageing, and it's multi-annual, I think it's every 2 years you publish. We obviously have the Growing Up in Ireland study, but what more do we need there? Like when you hear Niall talking about, you know, just not having the data to demonstrate return on investment and impact, we're clearly missing lots of data points that might empower commissioners like Chris and Niall to tell that story, which means they can unlock more investment, but better understand the lived realities. So what more do we need on the research piece, given what you're seeing happening on ageing?
So we have a children's study in Ireland, Growing Up in Ireland, which is a very good study. But what it doesn't do is collect detailed health data, as we do in the TILDA study, and biological data. I'll explain that in a moment. And if the two studies could be closer in models, I think there would be much more persuasive data. I said data is the new oil. It is the new oil. You do need evidence. It's not enough, I think, when you're persuading funders, because it ultimately comes down to that, if you can't actually show hard evidence for a benefit for creativity or reading or whatever. In the TILDA study, we start at age 50. We see the same people 50 and above, a representative sample in Ireland, so that we can generalise to the population every 2 years, and it's been running now for 20 years. And therefore, everything I'm saying is built on that huge data set, 10,500 people at the moment, and we've refreshed the cohorts. And we ask retrospectively what childhood experiences were and their life course experiences, etc., including work, etc. And of course, from 50 on, we're following what that life course is like. What's it like coming up to retirement? What's it like after retirement, during retirement, when you get an illness? What was it about you aged 50, which actually we can now see predicted the fact that you had a stroke in 15 years' time, etc. So it's a very, very valuable data set. And we measure genetics and other biological markers. Your chronological age is the number of candles on your birthday cake. It's a nonsense figure. It drives me crazy. At 16, it's probably pretty homogenous, actually. You know,
we can just get rid of
generally
it now,
speaking. But you know, I hate it. This business of you're such and such an age, therefore. Nonsense. Nonsense because biologically we can be 20 years apart. When I take your blood samples and actually look at what your real age is, it can be 20 years different from your chronological age. And that's what I was saying starts in the 20s. So it starts very early on. So if we had some of those measures in growing up in Ireland, which we don't have, I think that would be hugely powerful to show what the biological changes were associated with lack of creativity, with lack of exposure to nature, with being in a big cement block most of the time and going from there into a cement school with no exposure to any greenery, etc. Not a Glenties complaint, clearly. But, you know, that is the case in some of our inner cities. I work in James's, and I'm afraid that is the case for many, many children. Okay. So I think that if we had an extension of the measures that were being made in growing up in Ireland, similar to what we're getting from TILDA, it would have a much more powerful influence on influencing policy.
Okay, good call to action there for the Growing Up in Ireland survey. Going to come to questions in a moment, so get your hands ready. But Patricia, next year is the year of reading in the UK. Given everything you've talked about today, do we need something like that to really demonstrate intent, political will, and kind of this forcing function moment?
We absolutely do. We need to have an overview of what's happening with reading. You know, I didn't fully say it earlier that the latest surveys show, and I agree with you, data's everything. The latest surveys show that reading for pleasure is falling off a cliff with our children. Really quickly, fewer children are reading for pleasure now than ever before. They own fewer books than ever before. They know very little about, for instance, children reading books know very little about Irish children's authors. So we know things have gone badly wrong. So something like a year of reading, and I'm waiting to see what will happen in the UK. You just hope it's not just a
marketing
kind of confetti,
campaign
that it doesn't actually mean anything. But I think in Ireland, if we could see ourselves as world leaders. And when I go to America, you know, they have this notion of Ireland that we're all fantastic writers and creatives, and you know, and we just nod and say, yes, that's true. But that is our reputation. If we could just for once cash in on something and say, okay, we'll do this and we'll do it properly. We'll make every school in Ireland a reading school. We'll make every library a central part of the community. Like Chris was saying about the rights of the child, we'll really stand up for that. Their right to access to the arts and reading and education, all those things. I just think it's not that difficult. It's not that expensive. €10 per head per child would give us a fantastic start with books and reading. Okay. So it's not that hard. So why don't we do it? And why aren't we taking more pride in who we are? We are the experts in that field. We are the storytellers.
You hear? I hope somebody is listening on the live stream or in our audience who might run with that idea. Come and talk to Patricia afterwards. Okay, loads covered there. Hopefully we've lots of great questions from our audience who've been listening. If we can get a microphone, we'll take one from... We might merge a couple of questions. Do we have two microphones? Yeah, we've one here. Yeah, take this lady just behind you. Here, okay, we'll take one here. So, and... Thank you.
Hello.
And if I can ask, give us a quick name and to a question, not a speech, so we can get around to a few
Right.
people.
Well,
you.
my name's Lata Sharma, and I'm from Northern Ireland, and I was very interested in your comments about giving young people the vote. I object to that, and it's for a very simple reason. I have growing up in a society where the easiest influenced generation of getting involved in anger and violence against each other were the youngsters. And if you look at history, you see that there were murderers who were 16 years old killing other young people because they were emotionally very sensitive at that age, and they're easy to lure into negative areas of politics. Hitler was one of the men who wanted 16-year-olds to be, conditioned. Putin does it. So I don't think it's a very wise decision.
And your question?
Well, my question is, how do you, going back to all of those things that you've talked about children's rights, one of the things I think, when you were talking about the kids in Ballymena and what they did, is education is a major problem in certain communities, and I think that resilience is also a major issue. How do you go about encouraging our communities who are living in very challenged areas to value education as a route out of poverty, as other ethnic minorities who've come from poor societies have had to do?
Super question. We'll bank that one. If I can give the microphone here to this gentleman in the blue shirt behind you. And I'll get a third one.
Thanks very much. Patricia, the question is for you, actually. And firstly, I'd like to say I'm really glad to see you on the panel. I think your role is really important, and I think it's really important that you're here in these panels. Your ambition at the start, you mentioned, was to have more children reading for pleasure. And I guess my question is, for us as parents, those of us who are parents, I feel, what do you feel is the onus on us to ensure that happens?
Well, you're crucial.
Hold on 1 second, and I'm going to take a third question. Thank you. No, 1 second. Can we take one over here at the side, please? Thank you. And that's 3 questions. I will come for more, but we'll bundle them. Super, thank you.
Thanks so much, Susie Deegan, Aaron's project. It's kind of links the two. In my previous career, I worked with children in kind of high levels of socioeconomic deprivation as a teacher. How do we alleviate the pressure on teachers and change the culture in our schools? Because all the things you mentioned, trauma-informed practice, mental health, creativity, reading for fun, they all get thrown out of the window for grades and passing exams. And teachers are under pressure, so how do we change that culture as well? Thank you.
I will come back for more questions shortly. Thank you. So, Chris, do you want to lead out on that first question?
Yeah, so the votes at 16-1, we can maybe debate over dinner. But I'll get into the education one, if that's okay, because it is a big priority. My office receives the majority of phone calls that my legal and investigations team deal with is to do with education. We have a special educational needs crisis. We have an annual placement crisis. The children this time of year not knowing if they've got a school place in September. We have raising numbers of children not attending school for various reasons. Anxiety-based school avoidance is a big thing. We've seen a spike since COVID. And I suppose one of my priorities for the next year is to find out more about that. We want to do some research into school avoidance and school absences. I think the question that was just asked there about exams, it brings me back. Again, I referenced Articles 28 and 29 of the Convention earlier. The purpose of education, how we define success. So in the North, success is defined by a child leaving school at 16 with 5 GCSEs. That's not how I define success. The success of a child is something different. It's about well-being. It's about nurturing that child. It's about finding out where the fire in their belly is. And for some children, it's about providing safety and love and support that they might not experience. So for those children who school isn't working for, I do think I have quite radical views on education. I would ask questions about the need for homework. I think in primary school, certainly, I don't really see that homework benefits. I'd rather see children out playing, reading for fun, doing other things. Exams, we need to think about the purpose of exams, and I'm not saying there's no place for exams, but all of these things put teachers under pressure. Teachers are trying to churn out results. Parents are under pressure. Children are under pressure. In the North, we still have a system where children are tested at 11 years old, and that can determine how you look at yourself as someone who was classified by the state as uneligible for grammar school education. I was one of those people who did not pass my 11+, but that goes with you. that travels with you. So what are we doing to our children? We need a radical reshape of the education system, and we need to put all these things on the table.
Okay, great, thank you. Questions 2 and 3 there. Patricia, do you want to take them together?
Yeah, I think the gentleman in the audience, I think parents are crucial, absolutely crucial. If I had to give one piece of advice to parents, I would say read to your children. Read to them from when they're babies. Read to them when they're 10 and they don't want you to read to them. Read to them when they're 13 and they don't want to talk to you. Read to them. Children at the moment, because of the whole social media thing, are a bit lazy about this. But we can make it much easier for them. If you read a chapter or so of a book to a child and stop at an exciting point where they will say to you, no, read on, Mom, tell me what happens next. And then you say, no, you read on. Leave lots of books around the house. Leave it easy for them to get their hands on it. Model good behaviour. Read yourself. Sometimes parents say to me, my child won't read. And I say, are you a reader? And they say, no, I don't read. I'm thinking, monkey see, monkey do. So read. Pretend you're reading. Make it look like fun. But and to answer your question about the teachers and the testing, and I was a teacher, what I'd want, if I had a magic wand, I would say, don't ask teachers to make reading a burden. Don't test them on where the adverb is and the adverbial clause. I couldn't do any of those questions, by the way. I've looked at them. I don't know what they're about. But, instead of that, if teachers could read to them, read them books, sit down and read to them every day. When I was teaching, it was the one thing we all look forward to. At the end of the day, I would read them a book. And no matter what happened between us all day, no matter what rows we had, it all ended there. I would read the book and they would listen. And I didn't ask them to do anything. I have never said to a child that I taught, so now, recap, what did I say there? And what do you think of that character? Never. It has to be pure enjoyment. That's what you're selling. We're like drug dealers. You have to get them hooked. Once they're hooked, they will just drain you of all your money looking for books. But you have to hook them. And we can learn a lot from drug dealers. Give them a taste. Give them a taste to get them going, get them interested, and then lure them in. So that's what I would think.
Thank you. Brilliant questions. Right, we've time for more questions if we can get microphones moving around. We'll take the yellow shirt. Can we take down here through the middle? We'll take this lady here. So let's get this first one going. We'll take a second question here in a second. Go.
Hi, my name is Tina Roach, and it's a question for Niall. Why are we not making progress on the whole traveller community? The discrimination against travellers is now worse than ever, and we have a rate of suicide that's 7 times the national average in the travelling community, and we have children as young as 12 committing suicide. Sorry, I have just one other question. So that's one. And the second one is, how are we going to protect our children against social media, and in particular pornography? It is rampant on social media, and we don't seem to have decided how something as awful and as corrosive of what it's doing to our kids. We haven't decided what we're going to do. Okay. So
thank you. 2 really important questions. Thank you for that. I'll take a question here.
I was just curious about housing. If we can't prioritise 2,200 families, isn't it clear that the government have no appetite for building houses at this point? I mean, I view it as a layered cake, of which I sit in it as a small property owner, and it's a very complicated situation, and there's homelessness, and then there's the big investors, but they're just not building, and they just are showing no appetite to do it. So I think can we agree that they just don't want to do it anymore?
Okay, I'll have your question. Show of hands. Let's go down the very back and get a microphone to someone. I can't even see hands anymore. Here, yeah, down the very, very back. Red, thank you. And give me a show of hands over here. Okay, let me see. Down the back as well, there was a blue shirt. We'll come to that 4th question in a second. Go.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm 16. My question is about providing more classroom assistance in schools. I'm quadriplegic and ventilated, but I go to a mainstream school and I've just sat my junior cert. I have a lot of support and it has paid off for me. it took a lot of organising to get me started and get support in place. I think with the right planning and early intervention, anything is possible.
Well done, Ryan. Had you anything else you want to add, Ryan?
Do the panel agree about extra classroom assistance in schools?
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Super question. I'm going to get that answered for you in a moment, and I'll take our fourth and final question here. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Stephen, and much like Ryan here, I'm 17, and I've been representing young people here locally, nationally and internationally now for many years. But recently, Ireland, do you want me to stand up there for you?
Yeah, do.
Yeah. I found out recently that Ireland ranked 18th out of 141 countries in terms of youth participation on the Global Youth Participation Index. And my question is really, and perhaps Niall there, you might be best placed to answer, but how do we go from here? Like, 18th is impressive, but how do we go up there? Like, how do we get to number one? How do we get a mark of 100 there? Particularly as a young person involved in youth participation, you know, I'm always trying to figure out how can I do better and how can people like me do better. So I really, like, from this expert panel here, how do we improve on that?
Okay, great. Thank you. Brilliant question. Okay, we had the two questions up here at the front. Niall, do you want to lead out on them first?
Sure. To Tina, the progress on traveller work, I think it's an absolute disgrace the way we continue to systematically build in discrimination against travellers at this point in time. We have not cracked that problem yet. We did an investigation into a traveller halting site 5 years ago. It took us 2 years to investigate it. Clear derogation of duty, 30 odd years in the site, overcrowded in every aspect, designed for 40 people, had 160 people including 70 children. No running water, no electricity, no playground, no tarmac. Rodents, 3 or 4 times the level of chest infections in that area in comparison to non-traveller children. Huge discrimination. We then spent a year, after investigating for 2 years, we spent a year getting the local authority to agree with us to accept the recommendations before we went public. And they had to get the support of that. So we went public and there was a massive outcry and they got the support they needed. With a lot of work, 18 months later, they got 20 million euros to fix that traveller site for the first time in 30 odd years. And that was also the first time after their outcry that every local authority in the country spent their funding for traveller accommodation. There's not a single budget in the whole of any local county council that would ever be sent back without a row, except the traveller accommodation one. And we never ever had a problem with that. Now they're starting to spend it, they're starting to use it. We've asked that local authority to assist other local authorities to say, listen, how can that be done? It's not simple. There's a lot of mistrust between both sides of the community. There's a lot of criminal activity that people are being blamed for that isn't real. There's a lot of myths. I had an interaction with a minister at that time, which was about 3 years ago now, and he told me a story about how the children on that site were used as barriers in front of bulldozers to stop things being changed. And I said, that's an awful thing. Do you want me to, I'm going to make a child protection complaint on that? He said, no, that was 8 years ago. Yeah, seriously, no, that's the sort of myths that are used against the travellers all the time, the same old arguments. We have a lot of work to do. I wish I could say there was a simple answer to that, but it's the sort of things that if we can make sure that children's rights are at the fore, then travellers won't drop down when an economic crisis comes. Their mental health services, which was there before economic crisis, will come back. Their specialised health care will come back. Accommodations will be provided in a better way. And there is a solution, but it's hard work. And we need to acknowledge that immediately. We give them the tokenism now, unfortunately, it's turned out to be tokenism, of calling them an ethnic minority. And we haven't followed through on the supports and the resources for that. So there's a lot of work to be done on that one.
And on the second part, and I appreciate it's a very complex area about online porn, but maybe just briefly something on that.
I mean, listen, that's huge. We're starting to get there. I think this week is the first time that all the companies in Europe now have to have a verifiable working age verification system in place. That means things like we don't say what it's going to be, but it could be things like a child says they're 16 years of age. Within 2 weeks, you know by their content and the way they act whether they're 16 or not, and you need to cancel them if they're not. The Commission of Man is going to work on that. We need age verification that works like that. For me, I would have limited anonymity. End of story. That's your answer. That's your answer. Take away. If you want to go online, you need to tell me who you are, and I will find you. And I don't think that'll cost them money. I don't think it'll cost them money, because the people that are trolling aren't spending money anyway. They're just using anonymous accounts. And if you want to be a bully, I know who you are. If you want to be in porn, I know who you are. I know what age you are. I think that's the answer, anonymity, but nobody's putting that forward.
Okay. Another way, Niall, you can't open a bank account without proving who you are.
Okay.
Why would you be able to go online and not say who you are?
Okay, and the third question was on housing. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, again, listen, appetite for housing and building, I agree. I think I'm not sure where it's at the moment. My cynic would suggest that the developers have all the cards. Anything that needs, any adjustment that the government have made has always been in favour of making it cheaper for them, not for the people who are going to buy. We had a situation in 2018 where NAMA still owned 10,000 units, and they wouldn't use it for homeless facilitation. They instead held onto it and sold it at a reasonable price to a vulture fund, and now we can't use them. You know, even if we said, right, we'll hold them and use them as ourselves for 5 years, the price went up, we would have made money on it. So even the way they make decisions on those situations when we had the units hasn't been very positive. So I'm not quite sure where we go from here, but it hasn't been. If you say that the previous behaviour is the best predictor of future behaviour, we could be in very big trouble, because we're not taking control of it. It's all in control of the profit makers, not the local authorities.
Okay, thank you for that. Then we had the great question from Ryan, our junior search student.
A brilliant question. Again, one of the things we fought for, there's about 130 schools, special education schools. I know you're in the mainstream, Ryan, but even again, the old system in Ireland was that everything was done by a charity. Charity set up the special schools, religious run them. We had children going in, like you, needing a medical nurse every day of the week to be in to support them, classroom assistants. That was being funded by the charity of the religious order. HSE wouldn't pay for it. The staff member who was going in didn't have HSE clinical cover, so they wouldn't go in, and they couldn't get the staff. We managed to get the HSE and the Department of Education to agree to fund those sort of nurses into those situations. We need to do that all across the country, so that young people like you can reach your potential. And there's going to be, thankfully, it's so great to hear that you've done that and got the assistance to do that. But with medical technology, we are now getting children surviving who 10 years ago would have died. So we need to provide our education system to facilitate them to reach their potential. And that will involve medical help, it will involve psychological help, it will involve physical environment. So we really need to, and again, that's where the rights come into play. You're born, if somebody's born with an oxygen deprivation or a physical issue, that should straight away put them into a system that says we're going to support you all the way through your life and make it easy for you.
Brilliant, thank you. And our final question on youth participation. Chris, do you want to come in there? Niall, do you want to take that?
I think both.
Okay.
Chris is good. Chris, I think between us. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're okay.
For me, I think again we need to get our departments to be using children and listen to children's voices. That's where the step forward is. That's where you're going to go from the 18th place of participation of young people in the country to top 10. We have children who are the most insightful and accurate in solutions that I've ever seen all around the world. We go to all over Europe, myself and Chris have done it, and our children are just as insightful and forward thinking as anyone around the world. I think we need more of that.
Okay, Chris, briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. I suppose to sort of draw the conclusion on a positive note, I do agree that Ireland, Northern Ireland, Great Britain, UK is really good at youth participation. I think we have an island and islands of leading academics in terms of child's rights and child participation. We have a really vibrant child and youth sector, and we have young people like the two young people who spoke today who are inspirations to us all. We go to the UN regularly and we go to Europe regularly, and young people blow the audience away. But I do agree we need to keep raising the bar, okay. And I would say through incorporation of the UNCRC we can fully we can legislate for young people's voices.
Brilliant. We are on time, but to bring us kind of try and put a wrap on this, I'm going to give you 30 seconds each, otherwise I'll pull your microphones. But leave us, each of you, Patricia, a call to action. words of wisdom, a final mantra, and I'll ask each of you to do the same. Go.
See how fast I can talk. So I would say, as you know, I would say school libraries, bring them back. Add to them, have librarians to guide the children, make them a safe place in the school and the hub of the community. Very quick story. A novelist in Switzerland, Mariella Mayer, was a Roma at a time when Switzerland decided they didn't want the Roma anymore. And she was taken from her family. She was put into various orphanages. She got pregnant at 18. Her baby was taken from her. She was forcibly sterilised. At the end of all that, somebody asked her, how did you know that there was something better? How did you know that there was another possibility? And she said, I knew because I read Heidi.
Wow. Wow. Very good. Love it. Niall.
I'm going to take a leaf off. Roseanne was talking about hope and the importance of hope. We need to bring that to our children on a consistent basis. If anyone remembers the movie Pursuit of Happiness, it told the story of Chris Gardner, who described himself as a homeless, working army veteran with a toddler trying to survive in the world. And he did it through teaching his child how to be positive, how to keep going, never get knocked down, don't take no for an answer, fight for your dreams, all those things. And there's a wonderful story. But we shouldn't make it that hard. You know, he deliberately says himself that he fought deliberately, consciously to break the cycle that he'd gone through. Every single cycle. He had child abuse, he had domestic violence, there was alcoholism, there was poverty, there was fear. We need to take away all those traumas. And Roseanne talked about it. We've got to stop the adverse childhood experiences. So from the very start, the child is born into what circumstances. We as a state need to make sure their rights are fully vindicated, support their families to help them, support the organisations around them, early years, education, youth workers, wherever is needed. That's where the hope comes. So if I'm asking you guys, call for action, anyone you're talking to, legislators, policymakers, CEOs, entrepreneurs, children's rights is the core to creating a society that you want in the future.
Okay, great. Roseanne.
Use all of our society to ensure that children get a safe entrance into this world. Use older persons who want to. It gives a purpose to people, and we know that after we retire, we all need purpose. Volunteering has a hugely beneficial effect. I was describing that earlier on at lunchtime. It's massive, biologically. I keep coming back to that. We don't do enough of it. We don't engage our younger society with older society enough, and use the wisdom that we have accrued as we age.
Great. Chris, very briefly.
Okay, very briefly. I'm just asking every individual in this room to talk about children's rights. Talk about them in your home. Talk about them with your family. Talk about them to your TD and your MLA. Because we want, in our next election, we want to see this in manifestos. In the North, that's definitely our ambition. I'm sure Niall would agree. Talk to your TD, your MLA, and in your communities about children.
Well said. As we go to the coffee break, I said at the start that each of you can be the one good adult in the life of a child, and hopefully there's something in the last 75 minutes that we sparked, inspire you into action. Go forth, have a lovely coffee break, and give it up for our amazing panel, and Chris, Roseanne, Niall, and Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a fantastic panel. It's the inspiration and optimism we need, which is possible. Now, the next session is at 4:15. It's caught in the crossfire, so please can you make it back for that? We do have tea and coffee down the back and also at the coffee truck and in the coffee dock in the hotel. And just one quick announcement. Brianna Alton, your cards have been found and they're at the registration desk, so come and collect them. Thank you so much. Thank you.